Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking part in Southern Gas Association's Natural Gas Take Action Month and for attending this webinar, Natural Gas Innovation, Hydrogen. We hope everyone is safe and healthy during this unique time, and we appreciate your commitment to partnering with us to help change the narrative around natural gas. The purpose of federal and state antitrust statutes is to assure the preservation of a free and competitive economy. To achieve this end, these laws embody a general prohibition against any agreement or combination among competitors which has the effect of unreasonably restraining trade. It is the policy of SGA to conduct its activities in strict compliance with all applicable federal and state antitrust laws and to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Please note that all attendees have been muted upon arrival today to reduce the background noise, since we acknowledge that most of our audience is still currently working from home. We are relying more and more on technology these days and on the webinar platforms. Technology is great, but in the rare event you lose connection, don't worry. SGA is recording today's webinar and will send the recording link out within the next 24 hours. If at any point throughout the presentation you have a question or comment for one of our speakers, you can submit your question or comment through the questions option found on the control panel. You can also download a copy of the entire presentation from the handout section on your control panel. And now I would like to introduce and invite Andrew Hegewald, New Gas Business Development Manager with Dominion Energy, to bring on his video camera to introduce today's speakers. Welcome, Andrew.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to be with you, and this is an exciting webinar. My name is Andrew Hegewald with Dominion Energy. I'm located here in Salt Lake City. I'm the Gas Business Development Manager over renewable natural gas and hydrogen initiatives. Today we have a really exciting panel with three distinguished panelists that I'm looking forward to hearing from. We're going to start with Dr. Laura Nelson. Dr. Nelson, an economist, has led a distinguished career in the energy industry and is a long-standing hydrogen champion. Under her leadership, Utah founded the first of its kind annual Utah Governor's Energy Office Hydrogen Symposium. Prior to joining the GHC, or the Green Hydrogen Coalition, Dr. Nelson served as an energy policy advisor to Governor Herbert of Utah. From 2014 to 2020, was executive director of the Utah Office of Energy Development. As a leader in the energy community, Dr. Nelson has extensive board and committee experience, including serving as the chair of the Utah Energy Infrastructure Board and chair to the Western Interstate Energy Board. Dr. Nelson holds a PhD in economics from the University of Utah. So with that, we will hand it off to you, Laura.
Great. Good morning. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's really exciting to be with everyone today. I see we've got lots of attendees joining this conversation, and I want to express my appreciation also to the Southern Gas Association and really bringing forward this important conversation and talking about innovation and in the future of natural gas, and making sure that we have what I like to call those thermal and molecular solutions that are going to be so fundamental to realizing a clean energy economy for everyone. So with that, I'll go ahead and kick off my formal presentation. So if we can go ahead and progress. My objectives for today are to introduce you to the Green Hydrogen Coalition, let you know what we're about and what we're up to. And I think really to understand kind of the context that we're coming from, I think defining green hydrogen will be important. And then what we're seeing happening in terms of scaling green hydrogen today, talk about some of those innovations that are already being deployed. And then, of course, we are very collaborative and we want to collaborate with all of you. So would love to talk about ways that we can collaborate. So I always like to, moving to the next slide, address the why we're here. And I think that we all recognize that climate change is an important issue of our time. In fact, it's been described as the defining issue of our time. And we are fundamentally reminded of that at this very distinguishing moment where we've had significant fires and storms and things that are occurring, and how we meet and address this, I think, is going to be critical to this generation and also to future generations to make sure that we have a reliable, resilient, and affordable energy system that is clean and addresses the issue of climate change. So at the Green Hydrogen Coalition, our mission, next slide, is to facilitate the policies and practices that will advance the production and use of green hydrogen in all sectors where it will accelerate a carbon-free energy future. Our approach as a 501c3, I think, is unique because we focus on large, scalable projects that can leverage multi-sector opportunities to simultaneously scale supply and demand, because it's really about creating that market. And it's really because of our supporters and our donors that we're able to deliver this work. So I'd like to just highlight and recognize the supporters of our organization. And we, as you can see from this slide, are supported by gas distribution companies, Dominion, thank you, SoCalGas, also folks that are interested in elevating green hydrogen, for example, as a storage technology and blending it with these many renewable energy solutions that we have coming onto the market today. So large solar developers, utilities like the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power that are looking at significant investment and deployment of green hydrogen as part of their not super long-term future, but very near-term future. And then also looking at difficult to decarbonize sectors like aviation. So in fact, we have a sponsor today that is working on zero carbon emissions in the aviation space using green hydrogen. So with that, let's just move on to the next slide and just highlight what are the distinguishing features of green hydrogen. Green hydrogen, and we'll talk more about this in just a minute, is a globally traded commodity today. Most of it is produced from fossil resources. So hydrogen has what we like to call colors, and this slide indicates what those colors are and kind of the carbon impact of those different colors of hydrogen. We have hydrogen that's categorized as brown hydrogen that's produced from coal for lignite, and we also have hydrogen that's produced from natural gas and undergoes an SMR process. You can then take that gray hydrogen that's produced with natural gas or possibly even other ways of using fossil energy to produce hydrogen, and you can combine it with a carbon capture and sequestration approach to make that hydrogen what we call blue, in the sense that you're managing the carbon impact. But for each of these cases, the fundamental input for the production of the hydrogen is in fact a fossil-based resource. So green hydrogen is hydrogen that is produced by renewable energy sources. So the inputs at the front of the process are in fact renewable. And I want to say that for the Green Hydrogen Coalition, our front door, of course, is green hydrogen with a focus on the renewable energy inputs to produce hydrogen, but we support all methods of really reducing the carbon intensity of hydrogen production. And we believe that reducing that carbon intensity is fundamental. And we also believe that green hydrogen can play a significant role in reduction of the carbon intensity of hydrogen production and utilization today. So as the next slide shows, I mentioned already that hydrogen is a globally traded commodity today. It's used in a multitude of sectors across the globe. If you're looking at refining or ammonia production, even transport, even though that's small, it's still used in transportation. And so what if we could take all of this hydrogen that's produced across these different value chains today, so effectively 100 million tons of hydrogen traded globally, and I think growing, but most of that's made from fossil fuels. And if you compare that carbon intensity to a country, it's roughly the size of Germany. And so we really could significantly reduce the intensity across multiple value chains and uses today of a commodity that is already globally traded by utilizing green hydrogen and managing the carbon intensity of those outputs. So what is green hydrogen? Green hydrogen, as I mentioned, is hydrogen that's produced using renewable resources. So one process takes solar and wind or hydro And that can come from the grid, resources that are already built, or it can be purpose-built. You then take that purpose-built wind, solar, or renewable energy from the grid, you put it into an electrolyzer, which takes water and separates it into its respective components, hydrogen and oxygen, and the hydrogen is in fact a green hydrogen product. Similarly, we also support biomass and biomethane as renewable resources that can go into the production of green hydrogen. So similarly, you can do a biological reforming of biogas or a thermochemical application to reform and gasify to produce a green hydrogen. And at the Green Hydrogen Coalition, one of our principles is really to be technology agnostic. So we are technology agnostic when it comes to the production of green hydrogen. We support all methods of producing green hydrogen. So what is so special about green hydrogen? Well, our thesis is that green hydrogen is a super game changer in meeting our climate goals. And in fact, it's a fundamental building block. And that if we utilize green hydrogen, that we can accelerate decarbonization of multi-sectors. So accelerated adoption is fundamental. And it's not a commercial issue, it really is a market design challenge. So we really need to address the market issues if we're going to scale green hydrogen today, take advantage of those commercial pathways which exist to safely produce green hydrogen, provide for a multi-day and seasonal energy storage system for our power grid, and also scale hydrogen production to enable decarbonization across those many difficult to decarbonize sectors as well, like shipping and aviation. So green hydrogen really has versatile applications. You saw it in the slide with regard to how we use hydrogen today. You can use it in transport, you can use it in power. It has industrial applications, chemical applications, and also agriculture. So again, it is a tool and it is a resource that can decarbonize many sectors. Now, one of the questions I often get is about costs. Well, green hydrogen today is more expensive than some of the other options. So moving to the next slide, what does this mean for the future? Well, we fully anticipate as we deploy green hydrogen that the cost of green hydrogen is going to continue to decline. Just by way of example, electrolyzers, as you use more of those, as more of those are in production, the cost of those electrolyzers will go down, making production of green hydrogen less expensive. But also what is simultaneously happening is that inputs to the production of green hydrogen, like solar and wind, are also rapidly declining and really at a rate faster than folks had originally anticipated. So the reduction of the cost of those inputs is also significantly resulting in a decline in the cost of green hydrogen, which is set to be on par with the cost of production of blue hydrogen within the next decade. And for those of you who are involved in energy systems planning, you know that a decade for planning is really not that outrageous. In fact, I've engaged in integrated resource planning in the power sector for years, and we're planning, 10, 20 years out. And so planning today for tomorrow is really key, and 10 years is not that far away. So just to emphasize what's happening today in terms of renewable energy prices, we're seeing renewable energy really competitive with our gas peaker systems and also combined cycle gas turbines globally. And so again, this is just to emphasize that the cost of those resources are coming down, and as the cost of those resources come down, we're going to see more development of those resources, and we're also going to see excess capacity for those resources because they are intermittent in nature, and so we can use that intermittency to our advantage for the production of low-cost, efficient green hydrogen. And as I mentioned, this low cost is going to be important for driving that multi-sector decarbonization across our energy space, whether we're looking at electricity, we're looking at heat systems, thermal systems, transport, or we're looking at feedstocks for all of those other applications that I mentioned. So green hydrogen costs are going to come down, and we're going to see it increasingly deployed across these many sectors. And I'll talk about a few of those today. So maybe just talking about transportation, folks often ask, well, how are you going to move the green hydrogen, or how do you move hydrogen? Well, hydrogen today is in fact transported in tanks and canisters or on trucks. You can also just, next slide please, I think it's coming along. You can also put hydrogen into pipelines and in fact take advantage of natural gas pipelines that are already in place to move green hydrogen, and that can be a low cost opportunity today. You can also store it in other chemical forms like in ammonia. And to the extent that you take green hydrogen and you put it into a power generation system, for example, utilize it in a combined cycle combustion turbine, you can use existing transmission and distribution lines to take that power to gas solution, power to gas to power solution to move those molecules via our transmission and distribution systems. So not only can green hydrogen contribute to cleaning up and decarbonizing our transportation system, we have a variety of transportation solutions across the board for moving green hydrogen. So on to the next, I think, big element of green hydrogen, that is the fact that green hydrogen can, in fact, as you've just seen from this transportation slide, repurpose existing infrastructure. And this is a picture of a very important coal plant located in Delta, Utah, which I'm in Utah, Salt Lake City, not Delta. But this plant really isn't too far from my home, a couple of hundred miles. I've driven by it often. I've toured the plant. This is an 1,800 megawatt coal facility today that provides a significant amount of energy to California, as well as some other customers. And I know Greg Wynn, who's on the call on our webinar today, is going to talk more about this. But the reason this coal plant is so exciting is because this coal plant is going to be decommissioned and recommissioned as a combined cycle combustion turbine, not quite as large, a little less than half the size it is today in terms of its capacity, nameplate capacity, 1,800 megawatts to about 840 megawatts. But that combined cycle combustion turbine is going to use green hydrogen on day one of operations, which is slated for 2025. So repurposing existing infrastructure is critical. And this is an economic engine for this community, providing a variety of jobs. So what we see with this plant is not only the repurposing of existing infrastructure, but repurposing of a multitude of resources, including jobs, so providing an environmental and economic solution all in one. So just to kind of give you a very quick overview of the project, the next slide talks about kind of the project goals. So what this project is going to do is to demonstrate large-scale thermal plant conversion to 100% green hydrogen, because I mentioned the plant is going to burn green hydrogen day one of operation in 2025, about 30%, scaling up to 100% by 2045. So that's what's going to happen with this plan. 100% green hydrogen by 2045 is the target. And this project can be used to develop the market for other products and other mechanisms that can realize a scalable regional renewable reliability reserve for the Western US. This project happens to be co-located with some very large salt formations, which can be engineered to actually store the hydrogen. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute, but I really want to emphasize that this is a project that can leverage curtailed and low-cost purpose-built wind and solar to produce green hydrogen at scale. It will displace the coal that's currently utilized at this plant and will provide for a regional reliability solution that is in fact renewable by using those co-located purpose-built salt caverns at the site. So very, very exciting. This is a power to gas to power solution that can scale, and this can in fact happen immediately. So just to highlight some of the things I've said, green hydrogen costs are projected to decrease, in fact, by up to 60% by 2030. So this is really significant, I think, for where we're headed in the future. And these are just some highlights of what's happening with regard to that cost. And you combine that with the fact that we have the knowledge, we have the commercial ability to do this today. Green hydrogen really is set up to be a low-cost solution for our power and our thermal sector. So just moving to the next slide, I also get asked, well, you know, it seems like we're seeing a lot of storage get developed. What makes green hydrogen so special in terms of a storage solution? And so I want to talk just a little bit about that for a minute. We at the Green Hydrogen Coalition do support all types of energy storage. And we recognize that different types of energy storage have different applications. So this slide, and I have to really give credit to Mitsubishi Power who produced this slide. Lithium ion is a great solution for short-term storage. You can stack it and provide for a longer duration energy storage as well. But as you continue to cycle the batteries, you do begin to run into some inefficiencies. And so those inefficiencies, of course, will drive up the cost. So as we extend past about the 8-hour, 12-hour utilization of lithium ion, we're really starting to push up on the cost, and the costs start to increase. Well, the cost of hydrogen storage in salt caverns, and this includes the levelized cost of solar that's utilized in the production, is really less expensive once you pass about that 12-hour mark. It's constant, right, at $122 a megawatt hour, but when it's in the 4-hour storage range, it really isn't your competitive solution. But the thing is, with green hydrogen, you can provide for not just that intraday solution, but for within the day, but also across multiple days, weeks, and even seasons. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be seeing more renewable resources brought on because they are showing up as the cost competitive option today. And with those renewable resources, we're going to have some grid balancing requirements. And green hydrogen absolutely can provide that grid balancing service across weeks and seasons that are going to be required. So because this question gets asked, I wanted to share that with you, that really it's about all storage, but really there are unique applications for different storage opportunities. So I do want to share with you some of the things that are happening globally, because we're not talking about a future that doesn't exist yet. This is happening today, boots on the ground, so to speak, with production and utilization of green hydrogen and big projects like the Intermountain Power Project coming online. And there are a lot of drivers for green hydrogen. So as we look at kind of a roadmap for clean energy, it's across all sectors. We've seen within different countries, within the European Union and the European Union Commission, really identifying large targets for decarbonization and clean energy across multiple sectors. And as we've mentioned, a number of those sectors are going to be difficult to decarbonize. And that's why green hydrogen really shows up as a game changer for decarbonizing many, many sectors. So let's just maybe talk about Australia for a minute. Australia has been in the news a lot in terms of their hydrogen economy and how they're looking at green hydrogen specifically as a significant export opportunity. And again, this kind of goes back to planning. We see the cost declining, we see these multitudes of applications. Let's plan for it. Australia actually developed a national hydrogen roadmap, creating hydrogen as part of Australia's future and identifying the specific opportunity for hydrogen exports as an economic engine for the country. Moving on to Germany. Germany, of course, is going to spend significant dollars in the multiple billions of dollars to advance green hydrogen as a clean energy resource. And this is, in fact, attracting innovation and investment. So we see at the Heide oil refinery in Germany that there will be green hydrogen production, in this case predominantly from offshore wind, that will produce an aviation fuel. 2019, the Federal Ministry of Economics really supported this project. We saw 30 megawatts of electrolytic plant set to be established to gather information on operation and really to target this for a scale up to a 700 megawatt electrolytic plant. So very, very significant for continuous stream of operations for green hydrogen production and utilization within an industrial system. So moving on to Belgium, just to further demonstrate the multitude of applications. Ports are a big driver of carbon emissions. So in Belgium, the port of Ostend is looking to utilize green hydrogen and demonstrate through, again, a phased approach, the utilization of green hydrogen to decarbonize that particular port with a carbon reduction goal of up to 1 million tons a year. So very, very significant, because this is something that we could then replicate and deploy, I think, across the globe. So let's take a look at Canada, the Chetwynd Hydrogen Project. This hydrogen project is, I think, should be very interesting, I hope, to all of you, because this is taking, again, electrolytically produced hydrogen from a wind farm. It's going to produce the green hydrogen, and this hydrogen is going to be injected into a natural gas pipeline at about a 3% concentration rate. So this injection and utilization of existing pipelines and combining it with an existing resource, I think, helps us to identify where these opportunities exist to maximize our resources and produce those efficiencies. So I think that's a really, really exciting project. So when it comes to green hydrogen, hopefully you've seen that, the technologies exist. It really is an issue of scale. And getting to scale is going to require, I think, these innovations that we're seeing deployed today, but it also requires that we think about market design and that we're innovative in that approach. And regulatory processes do have a role to play in the innovation of that market system. Regulatory processes can send a signal around the aptitude or the incentives, if you will, for the production of different types of resources. The challenge today is that regulatory innovation is slow. And it really isn't keeping up with the pace of technological innovation. I think I think there is going to be a time at which they merge, and we're working to identify how we can accelerate market design and efficient market design and really get it right. So we do have a set of policy recommendations at the Green Hydrogen Coalition for identifying opportunities to develop and deploy green hydrogen. We think that you have to define green hydrogen broadly, as we do. We also recognize that states have certain integrated resource planning processes, and that in fact green hydrogen can help to meet those state goals around those integrated resource planning policies, as well as assuring resource adequacy or capacity needs associated with those planning processes. And also, very relevant for this conversation today, can help in the terms of the planning for our future gas system. And so that planning, we think, is really critical, and there is a role for green hydrogen to play in that. Now, today we have RECs in place where we can track values for renewable resources. We don't have something similar for green hydrogen. So as a tool, evaluating and tracking green hydrogen can be an important market driver. We also want to look at how we can enable wholesale markets to allow for green hydrogen participation, very similar to what we've seen evolve with other types of storage technologies. Continued research, development, and demonstration are also really fundamental, and providing regulatory pathways to allow and support those innovations to be tested, I think, is going to be really critical going forward. So I think, all want to leave our planet better than we found it, and create an affordable, reliable energy future across our energy systems that are so vital to the way that we live life, whether we're looking at the natural gas systems, transportation, or the power sector. And so let's look across all of those sectors, identify what are our goals in terms of decarbonization for those various sectors, then how can we create a hydrogen roadmap that will help us get there. So lots of benefits of green hydrogen. On my next slide, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I just want to kind of reiterate why green hydrogen is a super game changer, commercially viable, repurposes infrastructure, decarbonizes a globally traded commodity, many sectors, and helps us achieve 100% renewable energy affordability, flexibility, and reliability. So that was my next slide, which isn't quite up yet, but we do look forward to continuing to collaborate with you, and I think you'll find in the handouts downloaded that there are pathways to collaboration. We have a guidebook that we've published. We'd love for you to check that out on our website. It talks all about green hydrogen. We have an upcoming conference, Visions for the West, that we'd love to have you all attend, which will be the most comprehensive organization, I think, of policymakers and stakeholders in this space. Andrew, I think your name is on that list, so we're looking forward to having you participate. And again, we want to work with all of you in continuing to build the future for a clean energy economy for everyone. So please stay in touch and reach out. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson. Very informative, very interesting projects that you guys are tracking and policies that you're advocating for related to green hydrogen. I neglected to mention to the audience how questions are going to be handled, and I apologize. We have over 320 participants in this virtual webinar, which is wonderful. All questions should be submitted via the question docking function on the GoToWebinar screen. I'm tracking those questions, and the format will be that each presenter will present for approximately 20 minutes, and then we'll have 10 minutes of Q&A. We don't have a lot of time for questions here, Laura, but we have gotten some really interesting questions, and again, apologize that we're not going to get to all of your questions, and would encourage you, if you have direct questions, to reach out to the panelists. And here's Dr. Nelson's contact information. If you'd like to learn more about joining the Green Hydrogen Coalition or contacting her directly, feel free to do that. But one question, Dr. Nelson, that came up is surrounding water. So obviously, as you mentioned, electrolysis consumes water, breaks water down into hydrogen and oxygen. Any concerns that you have, or that people doing these projects would have in a place like the West? I'm from Utah, like you. We know that it's very dry here in the West, about water availability and the source of water for the big flagship project you mentioned, the Intermountain Power Project. Can you just talk a little bit more about how water ties into this?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So this particular plant, maybe Greg will talk more about that, does have some associated water rights, and it can be repurposed. And then there are definitely ongoing RD&D efforts to look at how we can even use saline waters. There's a project in Montana right now that's looking at cleanup of, I believe it's a coal waste stream and the waters associated with that, to utilize in the production of hydrogen. And similarly, you know, other types of municipal wastewaters and how we might use those. So looking beyond just, you know, what we might generally characterize as kind of potable water solutions, we're looking at some of those gray water solutions as well, and can be an important part of overall environmental cleanup as we look at applying, you know, the cross section of innovations across municipal waste cleanup, for example, with production of green hydrogen. So definitely something that I think we have to think about and that we're continuing to evaluate. And the one other thing I will say is that for green hydrogen production, and the reason I think it's important to be technologically agnostic, is because it's going to really be a local and regional solution that's going to show up as what works best for a location, what works best for a region in terms of production, and also the use cases.
Great. Thank you for that. Just one other question that I think is very relevant for this audience. You know, this audience mainly comprised of natural gas utilities, and that is related to the contract around hydrogen. You mentioned that green hydrogen is a globally traded commodity. You know, in the natural gas world, the contract for physical gas transactions, of course, is the NESB, is what we call it. What would be the parallel contract for physical hydrogen transactions for this globally traded commodity you mentioned?
Well, like gas, contracts tend to be bilateral, of course, and maybe Greg will talk maybe a little bit more on this, but one thing I will say within the power sector today, I think that, you know, how we contract and how we supply is something that we're continuing to evolve as the market itself evolves. But today, for hydrogen, as I mentioned, production and storage, and there's already storage in salt domes today, so we know there are contracts for that. And in Texas, they've been storing hydrogen there in salt domes for, I don't know, 40 years, I think, if my math is right. And so similar to gas, I think there are a lot of tools and contracting applications that will apply in terms of establishing the terms and the bilateral agreements for the trade of natural gas, whether you're looking at kind of those longer term markets or those short term markets.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson, for your time and for your very interesting presentation. Really wish we could go through some of these other questions. They continue to stream in here, but again, I encourage the people asking the questions to just reach out to Dr. Nelson directly. So really appreciate your presentation, Laura.
Great. Thanks. Good to be with you. And I'll hang on.
Thanks.
At the end.
So with that, then we will move on to our next presenter, who is Andy Thomas. And a little bit about Andy Thomas. He is the director of the Renewable Hydrogen Fuel Cell Collaborative and the Midwest Hydrogen Center of Excellence, both of which are operated by the Stark Area Regional Transit Authority, located in Canton, Ohio. He also directs the Energy Policy Center in the Levin College of Urban Affairs at Cleveland State University. His research focuses on electricity regulation and markets, microgrids, transportation, energy storage, fuel cells, oil and gas development, and natural gas markets. He has served as an Ohio Oil and Gas Commissioner since 2016 and is on the board of directors for the Ohio Fuel Cell Coalition. He's received his JD from Loyola University of New Orleans, where he was a law review editor. So with that, Andy, if you want to turn on your microphone and video, we look forward to learning from you.
Thank you, Andrew. So yeah, thank you all for inviting me to speak today. We are here in Ohio. We are in the middle of natural gas country. So this concept of blue hydrogen is something that is very much of interest. And you mentioned, the introduction that that I'm the director of the Midwest Center, Hydrogen Center of Excellence, and also Cleveland State University, the director there of the Energy Policy Center. This particular program is run by Stark Area Regional Transit Authority, which is Canton, Ohio, about 80 miles south of Cleveland, Ohio. And they have been able to develop the largest hydrogen transit fleet west of California or east of California. I mean, they will be up to 17 buses this year, buses and paratransit buses by the end of next year. And so, what I was asked to do by SARTA, the Stark Area Regional Transit Authority, is to look at an alternative options to what they're currently doing now for supplying hydrogen. We have a hydrogen station on site, and the hydrogen is trucked in from Sarnia, Ontario, and it comes in as liquid hydrogen and then is put into a storage system, and then it's dispensed into the buses, usually in the late afternoon and evenings, because the buses require refueling once a day, and they can do that in the overnight, and line up the buses and refuel them overnight. So I was asked to lead a study team to evaluate what the alternatives were to that particular strategy, because that strategy is relatively carbon intensive. It's not as carbon intensive as burning diesel, of course, which was what we had been doing before that. But now we are trying to see how we can further reduce our carbon footprint at SARTA. So what we did is to undertake an evaluation, and you can see from the title of this paper that this report is that we were primarily focused on the blue hydrogen strategy. Although we did look at the green hydrogen strategy, and we will presumably look at that again if and when we finally put an RFP out on the streets for this. But right now, the blue hydrogen strategy looks the most promising for us, and that's what we're going to be talking about primarily today. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So why is transit agencies leading the move towards the hydrogen transit systems? And certainly the transit agencies are in a position to take leadership on the zero emission fleets. And SARTA, we looked at the battery electric strategy. And the battery electric strategy was not as attractive as hydrogen for a number of reasons. And the biggest reason is the range issue. We wanted if you're going to replace a fleet, in our case, we have around 50 total buses that we would like to ultimately replace. Replacing them with battery electric would require us to get a lot more than 50 buses. And whereas the hydrogen is pretty close to a 1-to-1 replacement for the buses. The other problem we have is cold weather. The battery electric does not work as well in cold weather as the hydrogen does. And then the infrastructure costs are also, we see frequently transit agencies get one bus, one battery electric bus. That's pretty common because it's very affordable to do that. It's a lot less affordable when you start looking at 20, 30, 40, or 100 buses, because then you're taking on a massive infrastructure cost. And so while that $2 million or so of infrastructure costs involved in building a refueling station is daunting for one bus, when you're looking at 40 buses, it's a lot different. So, this is also on the minds of the trucking industry. And so we've done a lot of work in looking at the long haul trucking industry. And in fact, we did a survey this past year of that industry. And for the Midwest, the indications we got is that the plan is that the trucking industry will, within the next 5 years, begin to put out fuel cell trucks into the system. And so we anticipate there's going to be a need for hydrogen refueling infrastructure, at least through the long haul corridors in the Midwest between Chicago and New York. And so that's another area where we've been focusing on. And what we want to do here is to look at the, specifically the SARTA requirements, but also look at it as a possible next stage for refueling throughout the Midwest. Next slide, please. So, having determined that the most likely scenario for us was going to be the blue hydrogen strategy, especially because of the long-term supply of cheap natural gas that we have available in Ohio, and especially in the Canton area, we made some assumptions about what the scale was going to be like for refueling. And one of the issues that we considered is that because the costs of refueling are heavily engaged in transportation and storage, a large portion, like 2/3 of the cost, are in that area. We decided to assume that we would be doing small scale. We also looked in our study at large scale hydrogen and the cost of making large scale hydrogen and delivering it to SARTA, but it has a higher carbon footprint to do it that way. And also, it turns out the costs, if you include the transportation and storage costs, are also higher. But for early stage adoption, we felt like the best strategy was going to be a lot of small stations. And in this case, we looked at, for SARTA's position, of 500 kilograms per day. And that supplies a fleet of 17 buses and paratransit buses. Refueling infrastructure that's going to supply heavy long-haul trucking will have to be significantly more than this, but at least for early adoption, this is what we're looking at. And we also looked at, and if we do steam methane reforming, that we'd be trying to capture about 1,000 metric tons per year of carbon. And the cost of that would be around $50 per ton to capture and compress it, but not to sequester it. That's just the capture and compression charge. It doesn't include transportation and sequestration. So what we next wanted to do was to try to match that to the enhanced oil recovery, or to new markets with single sinks that we were looking at. And those included enhanced oil recovery opportunities, ready mix concrete opportunities, and beverage carbonation. I think on the slides, I think we may have skipped a slide, but there was another slide that had all the other markets that are in Ohio. Right, that one. These are the other markets that are in Ohio and Pennsylvania that are significant for carbon dioxide. But for what we were trying to accomplish, what we wanted to do was to identify single sink sources that we could deliver high carbon dioxide to, that were comparable in size to the amount of carbon dioxide that would be coming out of our steam methane reformation plant. And so we assumed that, for instance, the urea manufacturing in Ohio, which has a pretty large amount of carbon dioxide, that they have already in place long-term contracts and relationships with industrial gas companies for CO2 acquisition and use. And so rather than trying to identify and compete with those opportunities, we wanted to try to find new opportunities that would be available in the Canton, Ohio area. Next slide, please. So that's where we came up with these numbers here. And where we focused really was on enhanced oil recovery and ready mixed concrete. The beverage carbonation we kept also as a possibility just because it fits so well with the size. The typical beverage carbonation user is about the same size as our carbon capture amount. The problem with beverage carbonation is it's not really sequestration. And so whereas the ready mixed concrete and the enhanced oil recovery are actually sequestration strategies. Next slide, please. So these are numbers from our enhanced oil recovery strategy. And we looked at 3 fields. The 2 that are in Ohio currently are not active. Core Energy is active, but you can see it's 450 miles away. That's the next closest oil field. That's in near Traverse City, Michigan. But the East Canton oil field is very close to Sarda. It's only about 20 miles away. And this was a very promising opportunity for carbon capture and sequestration opportunities. And so we looked at this as the capture cost at being around $50, trucking at around $6 per ton, and then the injection is being about $11 more. So the total cost was around $67 per metric ton of carbon dioxide. So that's really the target number that we need to get to. That's the amount of money we would need to try to recover from this in order to break even on it. There's a Morrow field, which is in central Ohio, is also another possibility. But the East Canton field is the most attractive in terms of ability to capture and sequester carbon. Next slide, please. So this slide here is one that shows the break-even points for as a function of oil price and carbon dioxide price. And the blue line, which is East Canton oil field, is the one that we're really focused on. And for this one, if you look at around $70, which is the area that we were looking at for break even, it renders a cost for oil or price for oil that it needs to be somewhere around $50 to $55 a barrel in order to justify paying $67 for the carbon dioxide that would be coming out of the ground and being delivered into the ground, I should say. And when we get, one of my later slides will be looking at the specifics for the carbon intensity of these enhanced oil recovery strategies, and it takes into account the fact that you are going to be putting additional carbon back into the atmosphere through burning of the oil. But the overall effect is that you will significantly reduce your carbon footprint by using your carbon dioxide, recovering it from the hydrogen generation, and then putting that carbon into the ground and using it for oil recovery. And the big problem here with this is that one station by itself would not be enough carbon dioxide to operate an oil field. You would need, more likely you would want to have a large hydrogen facility or a lot of stations. And it's not clear that you would get a lot of stations in the near term to get this field started again. It's currently inactive. And it's, prices of oil where they are right now, there's no plans that I can see that are in place to reactivate it, but I'm sure that the owners of the field, which I think is Enervest who owns it, would be interested in reactivating it if there was a strategy to go forward where they could get the carbon dioxide at a reasonable price and then be able to inject it into the ground to drive the oil out. But a lot will depend on the price of oil going forward. So next slide, please. So the other area that I mentioned is ready mix concrete. This is another new area to Ohio. And this is a map here that shows where the largest ready mix concrete opportunities are, or actually various sizes are. This is another one that matches as a single source sink very closely with a 500 kilogram system of hydrogen generation. This is a growing business, and the idea about ready mix concrete is it uses carbon dioxide in it to enable the concrete to be stronger. And I can't really define for you the chemistry of this, and for that I refer you to our lead author in this study, Peter Basaris, who is a chemist, PhD chemist, currently at Cuyahoga Community College, but he just accepted a faculty position at University of Pennsylvania. But he'll still be working with our center or with our research center, and he'll be available to answer any questions you may have about the chemistry of ready mixed concrete and any of these other issues that you may have. But I'll try the best I can if anybody has questions today. But the idea is that this is concrete is an area that contributes about 7% totally of the carbon that's in the atmosphere, or at least it's being emitted into the atmosphere by industries. And so it's a significant source of carbon. And if we can sequester the carbon from the hydrogen generation into these ready mixed concrete facilities, it will significantly reduce the volume of carbon going into the atmosphere. And as it turns out, these ready mixed concrete places are somewhat mobile. They require that they be close to where construction is taking place. So what we see is that they are turning up in places that are near transportation hubs. And that is also a good recipe for co-locating with hydrogen refueling stations. So if you have a hydrogen refueling station that has a steam methane reformer that's capable of producing 500 kilograms per day of hydrogen, it'd be fairly easy for it to be co-located with ready mixed concrete facilities that could take the carbon dioxide. So it's a good match. And the total cost of getting it to the one we looked at was within 10 miles of SARTA in Canton, and the total cost for that was around $60 per ton to capture the carbon, compress it, and then transport it to the ready mix site. We haven't actually reached out yet. This is all theoretical right now. The next step would be if we decide to go forward with an RFP, that we would start reaching out to some of these companies to see if they would be interested in taking it. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of a phased-in approach for how deployment of these refueling stations could be co-located with ready mix concrete locations. Phase 1 is just a single 500 kilogram per day facility in Canton. Phase 2 being three 500 kilogram per day systems, and then refueling stations, and phase 3 more than that. The idea would be that you'd want to locate them near transportation hubs and where there's a heavy amount of traffic. That is from long haul trucking. But as it turns out, there's another important cost consideration for where you would locate these refueling stations, and that is if you could get close to a high pressure natural gas line, that will also significantly reduce your costs as well, because one of the things we have to do at SARTA is to actually provide compression to bring, when we bring in the natural gas into the steam methane reforming plant. So next slide, please. So this last slide is the one that really is the summary of our study that we did, and it compares the costs and carbon intensity of different strategies that we looked at. The current cost right now of delivered hydrogen as a liquid is around $5.93 per kilogram, but it has the highest carbon intensity of any of our strategies. If we did on-site hydrogen generation with no capture, which this is the gray hydrogen model, it would be around $3.22 is what we estimated for the cost of hydrogen. And now this is significantly more than large scale. This is for a small scale 500 kilogram system. And carbon intensity for that is also pretty high, but not as high as the driving the high liquid hydrogen from Sarnia, which is around 270 miles away. And then the third option would be to look at renewable natural gas. This is also an option, and this simply is the renewable natural gas is put into we'd acquire that natural gas by displacement. It would be put into a Dominion system, and then Dominion would deliver us an in-kind amount. And that also has, that is a form of green hydrogen that has a pretty low carbon intensity, but it is fairly expensive. And then we looked at the different SMR sites, on-site strategies, and for just plain geologic storage, the cost was around $365. And then when we went to the EOR strategies for East Canton, it dropped down to around $350 per kilogram. But you can see where the carbon intensity goes up significantly from just geologic storage, plain geologic storage, up to the East Canton EOR. And that has to do with the fact that you're now producing oil that is burned and putting that oil into the atmosphere, or that carbon into the atmosphere. But even with this strategy, you're cutting the carbon intensity in half from what the current model is. So that has significant attraction to long-term planning for this area. And then finally, we have the example of the RMC, or the ready mix concrete, which is really a low-cost version and the most attractive strategy. And then electrolysis is the last one we looked at. So I think the last slide just has my contact information on it. If anybody wants to, if they have questions, they can reach out. This is the paper that we published about the the study that we did, and then you can reach me or my colleagues who worked on this paper at the email addresses that are attached here. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Andy. Very interesting presentation. Dr. Nelson started by talking about the colors of hydrogen, and she spoke a lot about how green hydrogen is hydrogen from electrolysis with renewable electricity inputs. Andy has now taken us to a new color of hydrogen, and I think it's important for us to really understand these colors because they are industry-wide nomenclature. Started speaking about gray hydrogen, which is hydrogen from steam methane reformation. I know that was one of the questions that we received earlier. What is steam methane reformation? It's essentially taking natural gas and cooking it in high pressure, high temperature steam to create hydrogen and CO2, and that process is known as gray hydrogen. Andy has then taken that one step further and taught us about how we take gray hydrogen to convert it to blue hydrogen, which is where you have SMR, but then use the CO2 that's generated from SMR and find a market for that CO2. And carbon capture sequestration is a well-known technology, been around a long time. What people often don't talk about in the CCS dialogue is what do we do with the CO2 once we've captured it? And Andy's, you've done a nice job in really explaining some potential CO2 markets in that region of Ohio. And that leads us to one of the questions that we did receive. And we did receive a question about a single sink. Could you just describe a little further what you mean when you say a single sink of CO2?
Sure. What I'm referring to is ideally what we'd like to do in order to reduce our costs is to be able to load up the truck with carbon dioxide and then take it to one location where all of it goes into that one location. And so that single sink would be, in the optimal case, would be a ready mix concrete location. So they would take in that one spot all of the carbon dioxide, inject it into their concrete mix, and then it's forever sequestered in that concrete.
Great. And you could potentially think about transporting the CO2 to the sink in a hydrogen fueled truck, right, to lessen the carbon footprint even further, as opposed to, say, a diesel truck. Because again, we're talking about transporting CO2 from the hydrogen production facility to a sink that you mentioned, whether it's an oil field or a ready mix concrete plant, or refrigeration, urea. You mentioned a lot of different markets in Ohio that was really very interesting.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Industrial gas companies kind of know how to do all that, and they would be able to tell you what the most cost-effective way to transport the gas would be. Obviously, pipelines would be great but you'd need to have a lot to be able to justify a pipeline. But this is where, for a large-scale plant, you could justify perhaps if you built a large-scale hydrogen plant at the East Canton oil field, you could pipe it directly and inject it directly there, and then likewise the same is true of hydrogen. You can pipe hydrogen as well if you have enough of it. And I do want to make one last point I forgot to make about the green hydrogen part. There are, even in our hydrogen scenario, even though we are assuming 100% renewable power to make that green hydrogen, we still had a significant carbon footprint from creating solar panels and other equipment that is required to create the green hydrogen. And so that's the reason why we had, even with the ready mix concrete, blue hydrogen strategy was actually a little bit less than the green hydrogen strategy was. But these are numbers that, of course, will require a lot more detailed analysis than what we did. But I just want, because it might be a little confusing about, if you have 100% renewable power, why would you have any carbon at all? And the reason is because it's in the life cycle of the equipment that is required to make solar panels and the grid equipment and the electrolyzer.
Well, thank you so much, Andy. Again, appreciate your thoughtful and interesting presentation on gray and blue hydrogen and potential uses for the CO2. So we will now invite Greg to turn on his video and unmute himself. He will be our final presenter today. We have about 20 minutes left, so we are pretty close to being right on schedule here. Greg Wynn manages the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power's 100% Clean Energy Innovation Group. This group is currently engaged in several initiatives to bring clean power into the Southern California region. Most notably, Greg is spearheading LADWP's efforts to conduct a comprehensive study of how the city of Los Angeles can get to 100% renewable energy. He and his team are also investigating how new technologies such as green hydrogen, compressed air energy storage, and carbon capture see how they would fit into LADWP's clean energy future. Greg has worked on a wide range of projects in the utility industry, from design and construction of electrical infrastructure to power plant operations to planning. So with that, Greg, I'll hand it over to you and let you take it away.
Great. Thank you, Andrew, for that introduction. Just want to thank everyone for being here today. I appreciate the opportunity to present on something that is extremely exciting for us with the Intermountain Power Project and the transition from a coal plant to a natural gas facility to potentially a 100% green hydrogen burning power plants. So with that, I just want to say again, thank you all. Looking at the current project today, as Laura had mentioned, the Intermountain Power Project is located in central Utah. It's 2 coal units currently, 1,800 megawatts of net capacity. It's been in operation for quite a long time now. And like I said, it's a good opportunity now to transition into a new source of fuel. When you're looking at the Intermountain Power Project, I think what tends to get lost is that it is just the power plant itself, but it actually is 3 parts, the power plant being one, and 2 large transmission systems, the northern transmission system and the southern transmission system, which I will go over in the next slide. So it's a combination of those 3 pieces. So it's not just the power plant, it is also transmission that is associated with this. And it's going to be very important when we start talking about how to transition into that clean energy future. Currently, we are already using those transmission systems to bring in some renewable energies into the Los Angeles area. We have a total of almost 400 megawatts from the wind interconnections that we have in the area from Milford and from Pleasant Valley. That brings those wind resources into the Southern California area. Currently, the plan is to close the coal units by 2025 to get ready for the new natural gas units that I'll go over a little bit in today's presentation. That will be essential to get us to that green hydrogen future. And just as a little bit of background, LADWP has a dual role in all of this. It not only is a participant, a power purchaser from the Intermountain Power Project, but it also works as the operating agent and the project manager. So we are in charge of the operations and will be in charge of the project management for the new the new natural gas facility. And so when we're talking about the project itself, I mean, there are 2, like I said earlier, 2 very large transmission systems. The northern transmission that moves energy from Utah into Nevada. It's an AC system that we utilize to move energy in that region. And then we also have a very large DC transmission called the southern transmission system that is bidirectional and brings the power from the Intermountain Project from the site in Utah all the way down to Southern California, where we have our different participants. So next slide, please. And like I mentioned earlier, this is not an LA project specifically. LA is a very large participant, probably it is the biggest share of the power purchasers, but looking at the project itself, there are it's a large collection of different participants. This idea of regional cooperation between Utah and California, which has been a big part of our history and will continue to be part of our future when we look at how to transition this well, at one point state-of-the-art coal facility into now a state-of-the-art hydrogen powered plant. So unfortunately, we're not going to be carrying on with all of the participants. There are some that are leaving the project, but LA will still continue to be a large portion of it. Looking at the new project itself, we call it the IPP Renewed project. This is us taking what we have currently, which is the coal facility, and changing it into a natural gas facility, because there is such an emphasis for us to be reliable as a system, as a project. So we're really looking for that dispatchable energy to maintain the reliability and to also support the HVDC system. These units that we're going to put in are going to be capable of integrating the renewable resource variability. When you look at the system as a whole, you can see that there's going to be a lot of variability because of the renewable energies, and so this power plant will help us to smooth out the system by producing that dispatchable energy. It's going to be required for us to get to that 100% renewable goal, and that's the large part of my presentation today. And because it is located in Utah, it will have less of a reliance on the in-basin gas units that we have, and also some of the storage problems that we saw at the Aliso Canyon storage facility. The scope of this new project is 840 megawatts of natural gas combined cycle. It was originally planned to be 1,200, but we saw an opportunity to reduce that. As also part of the project, we have a natural gas pipeline that's going to be built to fuel the project. And in looking at the converter stations on both ends of the southern transmission system, we are also going to be replacing those converter stations. They are in need of new facilities there. And then once that's all done and we're up and running with the new gas facilities, we will be decommissioning the existing coal-fired generators and the associated facilities around that. So looking at the generation itself, we're looking at 2 advanced class combined cycle units that we have a partnership now with Mitsubishi Power. They are going to be the original equipment manufacturer, the OEM for the generators. We signed a contract with them in 2020. We're in the process of working with an EPC where we're going to be putting out an RFP early next year to assist with the engineering, procurement, and construction of the new generators. On the transmission side, we're looking at, again, the replacement of our 2 converter stations on the southern transmission system. One is called the Intermountain, which is at the Intermountain Power Project site, and the one in California, which is the Adelanto converter station. We are also in the process of getting that RFP out as well. In addition to the converter station work, we're also working on expanding the switch yards at both Intermountain and Adelanto. This will allow for additional interconnections that are in the queue currently, interconnections for the different renewable projects that are in the region. And we're also looking, because of the significant reduction of the original power plant to the new power plant, we are looking at different equipment for reactive power stability, looking at potentially changing our existing generator into synchronous condensers to support the transmission system. So with that introduction, I really want to talk about now how it is that we can take what we have at the Intermountain Power Project and use those existing resources to move forward with this green hydrogen potential here. I talked a little bit about the transmission system that we do have, the great amount of renewables that are in the area. The Intermountain Power Project currently sits on 4,600 acres of land, and we have water rights that are needed. That we obtained water rights at the beginning of the project for the coal units, and as we move over to the gas units, they're going to be significantly less water usage, but we still will maintain those rights. And so, to the question earlier about water, we have the rights to that water, and production of hydrogen isn't as water intensive as some may think. And so, because we have the abundance of water, because of the coal plants, the reduced use that we are looking at for the new project, if we have we'll have sufficient amounts of water to move forward with the green hydrogen production. As mentioned earlier by Dr. Nelson, we are sitting on top of a large salt formation that is ideal for storage of hydrogen. And of course, we can't forget that we have a large workforce out in the Utah area, specifically at the Intermountain Power Project. We have very technical staff, experienced operators, and great management there, so that we can also utilize for to drive the economy and keep people employed in that area as we look at this new industry. So looking at the project itself, one of the things that I had mentioned was that one of the resources that we have is that we sit in a great area where there is a confluence of different renewable resources that could be used for the production of green hydrogen. As I mentioned earlier in the introduction here, we have currently about 400 megawatts of wind generation and geothermal that we're currently interconnected to. And as we're looking at the new project, we have currently 2,300 megawatts of solar interconnections in the queue that we're evaluating, and potentially 1,500 megawatts of Wyoming wind interconnection that we're currently in discussions. And so this area is what we're considering now, this Western renewable energy hub, because it sits in such a great area with such different resource diversity and geographic diversity. So when we look at the whole chain of how we're going to get from renewable energies all the way to the production and combustion of hydrogen, we see that we have a great opportunity in this area so that we can utilize the resources that we do have and those capabilities so that we can both create this carbon-free energy and then also try to solve the problem of long-duration energy storage. And so we go from renewables that are being normally would have been curtailed to power electrolysis, and then throw into storage for the long term, and then to be used for combustion in the future. So looking at what we can do for generation, as I had mentioned when we were talking about the Mitsubishi generators, they will be capable of burning hydrogen day one. And so as part of the RFP that when we put it out, one of the requirements was to demonstrate the capability of burning hydrogen through that new turbine. And so when we look at the generators, next slide please. When we look at the generators and we start to, what we're trying to do here is really understand what the capabilities are from the different manufacturers. And so part of the RFP was for them to demonstrate that, and not only demonstrate a certain amount, but to also look at what the guide path would be to get to that 100%, what it is we can do now in current investment, so that when we go to higher and higher volumes of hydrogen, we're not tearing down infrastructure to put up new. And so as part of the studies that we were conducting, and in the as we looked at the project and its future, we are now looking at the ability to put in existing infrastructure that would allow us to have higher and higher burns of hydrogen without having a major impact on the plant itself. And so what I have here shown on the screen here is a schedule for that lines up with our major outages with the new gas plant. So as we take the gas plant out for these major outages, that'll give us an opportunity to make those modifications to the combustion system, to the fuel handling system during one of these regular planned outages, to not create too much disturbance to the operation of the plant. So when we look now, just going beyond the generation, because that's one part of it, one part of the value the Intermountain Power Project, to the reduction of greenhouse gases that are coming out, but also one of the big important parts of this hydrogen venture that we're looking at is going to be storage. And so one of the most unique features of the project is going to be the storage component. When we look at the potential that we have with these salt caverns, it allows us to do something very unique in that we can now shift seasons. And so in those more temperate months of the year, we can continue to store that overgeneration of renewables, take them into the salt caverns, and use them later when we do have higher loads in the summer. And so it's a great opportunity to take what would be otherwise curtailed and put them into a salt cavern. And for scale, a typical salt cavern is about 4 million barrels, which is, I show some conversions here. One cavern would hold about 5,500 tons of hydrogen, which is equivalent to 200 hydrogen buses, 1 million fuel cell cars, 14,000 tube trailers that would typically be used for delivery. So what you're doing here is taking a lot of potential and throwing it into the ground and eliminating the need for transportation of hydrogen. And the potential that we do have in that area is we have probably over 100 caverns that can be built into that salt dome at IPP. And looking at the different ways to do this, and Dr. Nelson had touched on this a little bit earlier as well. When you look at the levelized cost of hydrogen storage, I mean, there are a lot of different ways to do it. But when you look at the salt caverns, and that's that small purple bar at the bottom, you really look at that being probably the most efficient way, cost-efficient way to do the storage of hydrogen. There are other options, of course, like the pressurized containers, which could potentially be an option for us as well because we do have so much land. But the salt caverns, I mean, since we have the opportunity to do that, it is something that we are very interested in looking at. And so going back to the need, it's not a problem that we're going to see in terms of overgeneration in the next 5-10 years. It's something that we are looking at now as being an issue for us. And so the more movement we can make in that arena, the better off we are in that future. So looking at what we have now, this graph here is showing the different. I'll just kind of go over that the x-axis there is time of year. And the y-axis is the net demand. And so when you look through the first part of the year, we do have energy deficits in the winter months. But then when you looking at the spring and summer months, we do have this abundance of overgeneration. Even though we will have maybe blips here and there, like heat storms that we'd have to take care of, we do have a great amount of energy surplus that we can really use for that storage of energy, so that when we get to those deficit months, we can call on that storage to meet our energy needs. So then looking at energy storage potential as a whole, the work in hydrogen really serves to complete the picture of storage. Batteries are great for short-term dispatchable energy to try to stabilize the system in that real time. And when you go further down, you have compressed air energy or you have pump storage, which are going to be also great. But then when you look at true long-term storage, hydrogen is the piece that is going to complete that picture for us. Not to say that batteries and pump storage aren't useful; they have their own uses. But now, when we look at hydrogen, we can now have this complete picture of energy storage for our systems. And just as a reference, the storage in one cavern is equivalent to about 84 times one of the new energy storage projects that LA has been looking at, which is a 1,200 megawatt hour battery system. So one cavern at IPP is about 84 times the storage capability of that one project. So next slide, please. So looking at now just the overall picture, just to kind of recap what we're looking at. We have renewables, we have the wind, solar resources from Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, California, and the transmission to move that energy, to move it into the electrolysis process to create that green hydrogen, taking that renewable energy, putting it into these electrolyzers, changing that water into hydrogen gas, taking that gas, storing it in the underground salt caverns or potentially different storage media on site, and now allowing for the seasonal shifting of renewable energy. And then when the time is up, have the potential to now run the combustion turbines with a mix of natural gas with the vision of going to 100% by 2045. So now looking at the potential benefits, I mean, the biggest benefit, of course, is going to be the emissions. So looking at this graph here, looking at the x-axis, and I'll just kind of go over this again. The x-axis is years and time, the y-axis being the amount of CO2 being produced. And so when you look at the red, that is our current project, our current coal project, the solid red lines, you can see that as we move forward, as we're using less and less of the coal power, we have a significant reduction in that. And then when you look at that dotted red line, when you get to 2025, there's going to be, of course, a steep drop off when we shut off the coal plants. Looking at that blue dotted line, that was the projection of CO2 emissions for natural gas, and then that green line right below it is the reduction of emissions from when you have a combination of natural gas and hydrogen. So the ultimate goal being, of course, 2045, when we get to that 0%, 100% green hydrogen with no carbon emission. This here is just to really show our timeline, what we're looking at. 2025 is when the coal units go offline and the new natural gas facility goes online with the capability of burning 30% green hydrogen day one. And then as we look at the different upgrades on the switchyard moving forward and looking at the different RPS goals of the state of California, how we can have more and more penetration of renewable energies to power that electrolysis and green hydrogen. We're really looking at this timeline. It is, many will say, pretty aggressive, but I mean, when we're looking at something as important as climate change, we're looking at to be as aggressive as we can. And so, yeah. That really concludes what I have to talk about today. Again, we are looking at something incredibly exciting here, some great opportunities to use the resources that we have and get to that clean energy future that we're all looking for. So my contact information is here. People, please feel free to email me, and I'll try to answer as many questions as I can.
Greg, thank you so much for that presentation. This project, the conversion of Intermountain Power Plant from coal to natural gas, ultimately to hydrogen, really is industry leading and groundbreaking, and we'll all learn a lot from what you guys are doing out there in Delta, Utah. So thank you again for sharing that. We have time for just a couple of questions.
Sure.
One question that came in was regarding the safety of hydrogen storage in a salt cavern in terms of leak rates or combustibility. Any thoughts on safety of hydrogen in salt domes?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. I think that comes into a lot of people's minds when we're talking about, well, one, just new technologies in general, and two, specifically when it comes to hydrogen. A lot of times people have this idea that when you're talking about hydrogen, you're talking about this incredibly explosive, very volatile fuel, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, it is a combustible fuel. But when we look at the salt caverns themselves, I mean, they are a very safe way to do it. The salt structure is very stable and works well to capture hydrogen, being that it's such a small molecule. I mean, leakage is going to be an issue, but because hydrogen is also such a small and light molecule, it tends to just to float into the atmosphere. And so you don't have this pooling that you would have, say, for something like natural gas. If it were to ignite, would kind of blanket the ground level. When you have something like hydrogen that if there is a leak, it does tend to float out into the atmosphere. So I mean, yeah, it's something that there's a ton of research that is going into it. Something that is very front of mind for us because safety is one of our priorities, and so I do appreciate that question.
Great, and then finally, we got a question regarding funding. How will the conversion from coal to gas, ultimately to hydrogen, be funded? Can you speak just briefly about that?
Sure. Yeah. When we were looking at different ways of funding the project, the project itself to move into from coal to natural gas is going to be done through financing. The hydrogen fuel supply, even though we're looking greatly into it, I think the first part of this whole thing is going to be through probably a fuel purchase type of agreement. So we did put out an RFP earlier this summer for those for the industry to show us what the capability is there, and so it would probably be through some sort of fuel contract when we're looking at the fuel supply side, and of course we're looking at partnerships with the Department of Energy and different organizations to see if we can run some pilot projects as well. So we're looking at different ways of trying to get the funding necessary to get this thing going.
Great. Well, thank you again, Greg, for your time. If you have any other questions really for Laura, Andy, or Greg, please reach out to them with their contact information. Really enjoyed being the moderator and facilitator of this fascinating discussion around green hydrogen. And with that, we'll turn it back to SGA.
Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, Laura, Andy, and Greg for speaking today and sharing your expertise, and to Andrew for moderating. Thank you to our attendees for joining today's Natural Gas Take Action webinar. Please note our next webinar is this upcoming Thursday, and we'll discuss renewables and feature Anheuser-Busch and American Natural Gas. Next Monday, we'll have a webinar regarding flaring, so please visit the SGA website and our events page to sign up for any and all of those programs. We value your feedback, so we'll be sending you a link to a brief evaluation as well as a link to the recording for this program. You'll also receive a certificate for professional development hours within the next week for attending today's session. Thank you again. We hope to see you this upcoming Thursday. And with that, we will go ahead and conclude today's webinar. Thanks, everyone.